way it works. And we're live. Today is Thursday, July 22nd, 2021 at exactly 5 o'clock p.m. And we are joined by the eminent Mike Chase. Ben, the monologue is yours.
All right. You know, I want to start by raising an aviation to all, and notice that it's not Scotch, to all the listeners of Rational Security over the last few years, so many of whom have had nice things to say on Twitter today about Rational Security and my co-conspirators in it. It has been a great blast to do it and getting together for Scotch and conversation every week with Susan and Shane and Tamara. Not that I need to get together with Tamara, but, you know, it's part of the gang, you know. It's been just one of the really fun things over the last few years. And so thank you to everybody who has listened and who has had nice things to say about it today. And fuck you to the people who've had nasty things to say about it. There aren't very many, but, you know, a good solid fuck you to all of you. 7 years ago, on July 17th, 2014, a young lawyer anonymously, looking back to the William French Smith era at the Justice Department. William French Smith was the Attorney General early in the Reagan administration, known for having earnestly debated important issues with his special assistant, Ken Starr. Back then, William French Smith and his team decided it was really important to know how many federal statutes there were. And they started what the census folks would call an actual enumeration. They went 1, 2, 3, 4, and it got fucking boring. And so they gave up. And in 1982, that was the last time anybody made a serious attempt to catalog all the federal crimes in the world, until this young lawyer, looking back, said, I have an idea, man. I'm going to do it myself. I'm going to do it one fact pattern at a time. I'm going to do it on Twitter. I'm going to do it anonymously. And here's the brilliant part, because like William French Smith actually didn't have a sense of humor. Ken Starr, I spent many, many, many hours with him. No sense of humor, like none, like the least funny person ever. This guy said, I'm going to make it funny. I'm going to do fact patterns right out of the Federal Register, and damn it, it's going to be funny. And for every goddamn day since then, 7 years without missing a day. Have you ever missed a day, Mike Chase?
I've not missed a day in the UTC sense.
Whoa. Whoa. Have you missed a day in the time zone sense?
So there was a couple of occasions where I tweeted before midnight Pacific time, but ensuring that by the time I returned to the East Coast, the next crime made it before midnight East Coast time. So
okay, so wait a second. If we believe in time zones, crime a day has missed a day. But if we adopted my scheme of universal time, crime a day has been perfect, right?
There are two ways of looking at it. One, yes. Or two, if you ask the question, have I done a crime for every single day of the project? The answer is assuredly yes.
Okay.
Assuredly.
He has never missed a day.
Never missed a day.
And that's an argument for universal time. He has never missed a day for 7 freaking years. Now,
right.
In the Bible, 7 years is enough to get tricked by your father-in-law into marrying the wrong daughter, so you have to do another 7 years. He's going to have to do another 7 years. Actually, he's going to have to do a lot more than 7 years. At the current rate, Mike Chase, when will you be done with the catalog that William French Smith gave up on because it was freaking boring and he had no sense of humor?
Well, so I mean, as a technical matter, assuming that no new crimes are added, I'll be done in February, sort of mid-February of the year 2848 is when I'll be wrapping up.
Yeah.
Okay. But that assumes that everything stays the same.
And by then you'll have a lot of wives. All right.
I can hope. I only hope, right? Exactly.
Yeah. So Genevieve has an important continuation of this monologue with respect to a recent Crime a Day tweet.
Oh boy. Okay.
Yes. So 5 days ago, I became aware that my recently deceased grandfather-in-law, I think that's the correct way to say this, may have committed a federal crime.
Oh, good. Oh, I love it.
Yes. So according to 26 USC section 5687 and 27 CFR section 31.201A, it is a federal crime to refill a liquor bottle with different liquor than it had when it was originally filled. Yeah. So my question is for you as a crime a day expert. Did he commit a federal crime? Because he was a man who believed in an evening cocktail, as does the In Lieu of Fun audience. Mm-hmm. And for his entire life, he had a cocktail with his beloved wife. And when she was temporarily in the hospital, he wanted to make sure she had her cocktail of the evening. And so he took an empty gin bottle and filled it with white wine, which was her beverage of choice. And so now the question I pose to you is this: is wine a liquor for purposes of this potential crime? Because where I'm sitting, it might violate the spirit of the law, but is it the letter of the law?
I think the key question here is what was the statute? 26 USC?
Yeah, 26 USC, Title 26 of the U.S. Code. So we are talking about taxation, of course.
Yeah.
Okay. Is wine a liquor within the meaning of 26 USC, whatever the hell?
No. And in fact, as the remark was, does it violate the spirit of the law? And in fact, the law speaks specifically of distilled spirits. So no, wine is not a distilled spirit. So there would be no violation.
Okay, so your grandfather-in-law may be deceased, but he is not a criminal.
No.
All right, let's talk about Elton John for a minute.
That reason. There are probably many other crimes.
Let's talk about Elton John for a minute. Because Elton John wrote, it's like trying to find gold in a silver mine. It's like trying to drink whiskey from a bottle of wine. Right. Now, this raises it's the inverse question. It's putting the distilled spirit in the wine bottle. Does that violate the statute?
There's an exception if you're wearing a mohair suit and electric boots.
Then everything's illegal.
Then it's all right. Okay. So there's a lot of Elton John threads in the law. So no. So look, I mean, and there's a further limitation to this law, but this is an area where federal criminal law and federal administrative crimes get really tricky, which is that the particular crime that we were just speaking about actually applies exclusively to folks who are selling or distributing the liquor. So if you run a liquor store and you're selling a refilled bottle of liquor, it's a crime. However, there's a separate section that makes it a federal crime for any person to knowingly possess a bottle that has been refilled. And so that's where you end up getting into trouble. You might read this provision and say, I'm clear because there's no violation here. But once you knowingly possess a refilled bottle of liquor, it's a federal crime.
All right.
How would I know?
If I take the bottle of gin that I used in order to make this aviation, and I poured whiskey into it, without more, is that alone a crime for personal use?
For personal use, it probably isn't. Although I think an enterprising prosecutor could actually probably find that you're packaging for resale illegally made mixed cocktail drinks, and certainly look, a jury can decide whether you planned. This is an inchoate crime. Maybe you were planning to distribute it, but certainly I think that's enough evidence to show attempted sale of some sort of noxious, mixed cocktail, whether it's an aviation or whatever. So.
We are not allowed to have fun anymore.
It's true.
But we are allowed to have Mike Chase back 7 years.
7 years.
Running the Crime a Day. Not 7 years since you outed yourself. It's been the great day that he outed himself, because he's actually a funny guy. And it's good to be able to like have a conversation with him. He used to only be an occasional DM. And it was like a cool thing when you would get like a retweet from a Crime a Day with a federal statute attached. It was like this mysterious cool thing that would happen. Now he's like demystified himself. But he's here with us today. He's taking your questions. If you have a fact pattern that you think might be a crime, ask him. It is legal advice, and he is bound by the bar to give you accurate information.
However, nothing in this conversation will ensure confidentiality. I will remind the audience we are live
there's
streaming.
An audience.
There may be some sort of a joint defense privilege,
Genevieve and I, of course, are covered by Section 230. Yeah. Mike is covered by the rules of the Connecticut bar. Where are we going from here? That aviation went straight to my head.
Well, wow. All right. Okay. So this has gone off the rails. Somebody's going to have to take
Are there
the
any good aviation crimes?
Oh my God. There are so many good. The FAA has pumped out so many regulations with criminal penalties that it's one of the best areas. Well, I mean, you can't go skydiving right now. It's a federal crime to go skydiving drunk. Okay. So, or under the influence of alcohol.
Reasonable.
Why? Just safety or?
Yeah, well, I think safety's probably the main concern. Here's my favorite aviation crime: federal crime for a skydiver to parachute with a parachute that has been packed by a foreigner, a non-U.S. citizen, unless the person that is using the parachute is also a non-U.S. citizen. So there's like a specific carve out in the federal law that says like, look, we don't want any Americans using foreign packed parachutes, but like foreigners, you can use a foreign packed parachute in the United States.
So Kate Klonick is right now at an airport. What perfectly normal behavior should she avoid because it would be a crime because she's at an airport?
The Alec Baldwin offenses, right? Like if she's playing Words with Friends, she's going to have to like put that phone away when the plane is getting ready to take off, because interfering with a flight attendant is a federal crime. There are certain sized torpedoes that are a crime to bring on an airplane. If it's
should I tell you my funny story about the FAA?
Does it involve torpedoes, or is it just the FAA? It
actually doesn't involve criminal law, but it does involve FAA regulation.
Yeah.
Okay, so in the early days of lawfare, when it was young and intrepid and amusing, and we would do eccentric things, we decided to have what we called the lawfare drone smackdown. And the lawfare drone smackdown arose because my friend Alice, who is a deep state operative, Alice told me she was thinking of building a drone, and I told her that I was thinking of building a drone, and she told me that her drone could beat up my drone, and I told her, no, it can't. My drone can kick your drone's ass. And before we knew it, we had a bet that we could each build a drone that could kick the other drone's ass, and so we decided to open this combat up to the broader lawfare community, and hence the lawfare drone smackdown was born. And I won't tell the full story of the lawfare drone smackdown, which was won by my children who cyber attacked the other drones in the drone smackdown. But you can find that on lawfare in a post called Operation Stucks to Be You. Shortly before the lawfare drone smackdown, which we had advertised on lawfare was going to take place at a park in Washington, D.C., and all the entry drones were going to have single combat with one another until only one drone remained, I got a call from the Federal Aviation Administration. I'm not
I bet
making
you
this
did.
up.
I bet you did.
Which called to advise me that the DC area was a no-fly zone with
Restricted
respect
airspace. Oh,
to
yeah.
drones, including rinky-dink Radio Shack toys, as it turned out. And I told them that we were only going to fly within a ridiculously small area, and they informed me that this would still violate the federal aviation rules. And so we removed the Lawfare drone smackdown, as is, and you can look at this on Lawfare. We documented the whole thing to a undisclosed location, which we had never disclosed where it was. All the entries in the Lawfare drone smackdown took place. It was outside the DC restricted airspace.
Gosh, wow.
It wasn't very far outside the DC restricted airspace. But that was my experience. They were very earnest. They were very kind of adorable and frankly a little abashed at the ridiculousness of their position, because we were talking about, toys purchased from Brookstone and Radio Shack and that sort of thing. But they earnestly informed us that the Lawfare drone smackdown was illegal.
What year was that?
Want to say 2012, 13.
Because you may recall an instance in which a postal worker decided that he wanted to deliver some letters to Congress saying that he wanted to get money out of politics, and he flew a gyrocopter from Florida to land on the lawn outside of the Capitol. And he was originally charged with violation, of restricted airspace, entering restricted airspace. That was the only charge. And this is the early days of Crime-A-Day, like very early days of Crime-A-Day. And the early footage from like MSNBC shows, so you use a telescopic lens and it's showing this gyrocopter crashed or something landed on the Capitol lawn, surrounded by, the ATF, and they're like diffused, making sure sweeping it for explosives. But I noticed that on the tail fin of this gyrocopter, he had affixed the U.S. Postal Service logo. And so Crime-A-Day tweeted out...
Good thing he didn't include Smokey the Bear.
Well, thank God for him, right? And so Crime-A-Day tweeted out that it's a federal crime to falsely label any vehicle as a postal vehicle. And like 2 weeks later, they superseded the indictment with that charge. And there's like never been like
Mike Chase made an appearance as a defense lawyer.
I feel horrible because I still live with the guilt that maybe they would never have charged him with falsely labeling a mail vehicle unless I had pointed it out. I think that the prosecutor must follow Crime-A-Day. So I feel bad about that. That was a misstep in the history of Crime-A-Day. So I'll never do that again.
Just speaking of aviation crimes, though, do we think that there's going to be an expanse and a push out on your timeline of reporting all the federal crimes because of all the behaviors that are now going on in like flights? They've had so many more, how do I phrase this? Violent outbursts on planes these days that they make for great TV and YouTube clips, but horrible travel circumstances. And dangerous ones.
No, it's definitely going to happen. And right now what you end up having is these violent dust-ups, which are like really plainly within the law and federal crimes. And I mean, there's no joke. You're going to get arrested for those, and you're going to get prosecuted for those. The trickier thing is that a lot of airports have started to shut down airport bars because of this, and for other reasons, for COVID and et cetera. And so increasing numbers of folks are trying to bring their own liquor onto airplanes. The funny thing about it is that there is a federal regulation that prohibits drinking your own alcohol on an airplane. It's in the CFR. It says that you can bring your alcohol on, get it at the duty-free shop or whatever.
No such rule on Amtrak, by the way. I brought a bottle of Aberlour on Amtrak, and I drank a fair bit of it, it was fine.
Well, I'm here to tell you that you're only violating the CFR if you drink your own liquor on an airplane. There's actually no criminal penalty applied to that particular regulatory violation. So,
well, thank God for that.
Yeah, right. So I guess the FAA could commence like some sort of administrative action against you, which would just be hilarious. I mean, to have like a civil administrative, you're gonna go before an ALJ and they're gonna like find you guilty of consuming your own lawfully owned liquor on an airplane. I think that'd be good. But yeah, no, you're definitely gonna see an increase in assault on a flight attendant crimes a lot. Yeah.
That's wild to me because I don't think of like the duty-free thing as like my own liquor. I think of it as what I purchased within the airport. So I imagine there are many people who have violated this federal law.
Oh, sure.
I have no idea. I'm thinking of like a bathtub gin that I've distilled myself, and it was like, hey, I'm gonna give.
Yeah,
this out.
no moonshine on airplanes
some
either.
Flights I've been on have been long enough to distill your own gin.
That's true.
I wouldn't recommend doing like toilet gin though. Like that.
Yeah.
Toilet is not accommodating that. Yeah.
I've also been on flights where there's definitely somebody in there that's been in the bathroom long enough that they could have distilled their own gin.
That it's fermenting. Yeah, that's good.
Yes.
Yeah.
So key crime a day history questions.
Yeah.
Since we've been through the 7-year.
Sure.
How did you have the idea that crime a day should be funny? This is a serious question.
Yeah.
Because, like, all right, there is the idea that the crime a day should document the truly awesome reach of U.S. federal criminal law. Mm-hmm. That's an idea. And that's a point that the crime a day has made, I think, just by existing. And also by using the fact patterns suggested by the Code of Federal Regulations. But the idea that it should be funny is actually like a complicated proposition and a non-obvious one. Like I think it's obvious to people who've just kind of read Crime a Day and have kind of like follow it that there's something funny about this. But like as an original matter, if I were thinking about like when William French Smith was thinking, we need to document how extensive the federal criminal code is and how it impinges on our liberties with things that no reasonable person could possibly be expected to. Like, there's nothing funny about this.
No.
How did, well, except like me trying to be jowly and stuff. Like, how did you have the idea that this was comic material?
I mean, like sort of the original impetus before the Crime a Day project ever began, right? I mean, I remember writing a sentencing memorandum for a client who, this is back when I spent most of my days attacking 2B 1.1 of the federal sentencing guidelines, which are the fraud guidelines, which were had these immensely ratcheted up penalties that had been constantly getting piled on to the point where, you know, people were trying to rectify the fact that there was a perception that white collar criminals were getting sentenced to tiny sentences. What was ending up happening was people that were getting convicted of, you know, fraud crimes, but were not like board directors. They were not like anybody in a position of trust. They were just committing essentially like high dollar loss consumer fraud cases. They were getting absolutely slammed by these ratcheted up violations. And so I remember pointing out to a judge at a sentencing hearing, I said, you know, this is one of the earliest sentencings I had, and maybe my third federal sentencing that I ever had or something like that. And I said to the judge, you know, Judge, I just want to point out that if my client had actually stolen this amount of money at gunpoint from a child within 250 feet of a school, he would have gotten sentenced to less time under the guidelines. It would have recommended less time. And so my view there was, look, this judge thinks this is hilarious. The judge really perked up there because of the absurdity of it. And I said, well, what else is absurd about the federal criminal code? And that was really the very, very beginning. But I mean, the more fundamental piece of it was, I think mockery is the best way to point out the absurdity of a position, a long-standing position that the government has taken. And what better way to mock somebody than using like explicitly their own words, like just their own words. And so for me, that was really the seed from which the comedic endeavor began.
That's super interesting. I mean, I'm reminded of my late former boss / briefly mentor, Meg Greenfield, who once memorably said to me, "Ben, there's no greater disservice you can do a man than to quote him."
Right. Exactly right. Exactly. Yeah.
Don't mind me. I'm just bringing people in.
Yeah.
Well,
no problem.
I
That was
think
nice.
now that we've seen Paula, we should probably hear from her.
All right. Hey, Paul.
Hi. Okay, so my question is how do you not get overwhelmed by the depth or breadth of it, or how did you overcome that? Because I had to write an essay about whether the place of solicitation included the White House residence, and I wanted to cry. Like, I would question the word "and" when I read it. Like, does "and" really mean "and"? And I don't know how, lawyers, Ben, how you guys deal with that, because it's quite overwhelming.
So wait, before Mike answers that, tell us about how you came to be writing an essay on this question.
It was for an American presidency class, I think, and we were writing essays on crimes that American presidents might or may not have committed. And I think mine was, Clinton might have committed a crime by fundraising from the White House, if I'm correct. And so I decided to focus on whether or not the White House residence would count as part of a place of solicitation violation, because I think Jimmy Carter had a fundraiser in the residence, and I think the DOJ had decided that it wouldn't count as a building of federal business because the president lives there, and I don't think that would count as where he's doing his work. And so that was what I tried to focus on, because focusing on anything else was so complicated, like reading all of the opinions. I think I had to read like old opinions from like Mika. I'm going to forget his last name. Ben, you might know who I'm talking about. He was like, I think, legal counsel for the Clinton administration.
Abner Mikva.
Yes, there you go. See? And so the only distinction I could find was that the White House residents seemed to be treated differently than other parts of the White House.
Yep.
So it's a good question. How do you avoid getting overwhelmed by the list of things that are illegal or arguably illegal?
Because that's the project, right? The project is that it's overwhelming, right? I mean, the whole point is I've embraced the overwhelming because that's the whole point. And so, I will countless times, right, throughout the project, 7 years, that's a lot of crimes. It's more than 2,500 crimes. People will say to me, "Oh, I think you've already done this one." And I say, I have not already done that one. I've done the other side of the or I've done the other side of the and, right? Or I've done the third word in the series, right? And there are rules, like we don't have to get into all of them. There's things called like the last and antecedent rule in construing a statute. All of these things, as you may be familiar with, they can change the way that a court could write a 30-page opinion on a single subsection of a statute. That's how I don't get overwhelmed. But I also think it's amazing because, basically my principle is, you can look all over the law and they say, what is a crime? Part of my whole feed, the thing that it generates the most controversy over is people don't agree what a crime is. They don't agree when something is a distinct crime. They don't agree when a violation of the CFR becomes a crime.
Mike, this is a frivolous dispute. I mean, this is a dispute on which you are right and your opponents are wrong.
Thank you.
You can go to jail for this fact pattern.
Yes,
you
correct.
can be prosecuted and imprisoned. And when the government prosecutes you and imprisons you, and when a judge sentences you, the premise will be that you committed a crime.
Correct.
All of those facts are not in dispute.
That's right.
Right?
That's right. No,
like
you're exactly
your
right.
opponents do not contend that anything that I just said is wrong.
No, and in
How
fact,
can they contend then that the cheese crime that is the predicate for this conversation, cottage cheese that's too runny or whatever, is not a crime because there's no statute that says it's
correct. That's 100% of it.
There's no statute that says if you beat somebody to death with a salami, it's a crime. There's merely a statute that says if you murder somebody,
right,
that it's a crime. Normally speaking, we don't lay out fact patterns in statutes. What am I missing here?
Well, no, I take it even one step further than that, though. I mean, you're exactly right. A great example is the Yates case, right? That got decided, at the Supreme Court ultimately, which was a fisherman in Florida. He caught a couple of undersized grouper. He found out Fish and Wildlife Services were going to be checking people's fish when they got back to shore. So he threw his overboard. Well, there is no federal fish spoliation statute. And so they charged him with Sarbanes-Oxley document destruction. And they said, well, look, if you look at the Sarbanes-Oxley document destruction statute, it says any data, paper, record, or other tangible object. And they said a fish is certainly a tangible object, so we're going to charge you with it. He got all the way to the Supreme Court. He had to have Kagan cite red fish, blue fish, one fish, two fish, or whatever from Dr. Seuss, all to be told that what he did wasn't a crime. He had a better argument there because the statute, and there was no regulation saying including a fish. Crime a day hews explicitly to plain language. In other words, I'm not going to say that it's a federal crime to destroy a boysenberry unless the regulation says boysenberry, right? I'm not going to just give an example that's not in there. So there are legion more examples of federal crimes than I could even list, but I hew to the federal regulations. But I think it goes back to law schools. There are professors out there that affirmatively teach in administrative law that regulations can't create crimes.
Ben, you're muted.
Let me give a very tangible example, which I just shared in the chat. Which is an article in The Atlantic by our friend Jonathan Rausch involving a case litigated a number of years ago by my friend Miguel Estrada. Miguel is a prominent appellate lawyer, notably of a conservative disposition.
Yeah.
This is a case of a Honduran man who spent many years in federal prison for a small percentage of his lobstering boat containing lobsters that were too small and egg-bearing. And the statute in question does not say you cannot import lobsters that are too small and egg-bearing. It says you can't import lobsters captured in violation of local law.
Including foreign law.
Right. Yes. So this is actually not only can U.S. domestic regulation define a crime,
yes,
foreign regulation can define a crime. And this person spent years in federal prison. Now, some of us didn't think that was a good thing. The case was extraordinary, but I believe it was, I can't remember if it was the Fifth or the Eighth Circuit that upheld the sentence. Miguel lost that case. And people like Jonathan Rausch were very upset about it.
Yeah.
But it is, in fact, not an arguable proposition that regulation can define a crime.
Or even sub-regulatory guidance. I mean, the thing about the McNabb case that is so actually remarkable, too, is there was affirmative proof put forward that the Honduran regulation that was purportedly violated had been repealed. It wasn't even current law. And so this person wasn't just prosecuted for violation of, via the Lacey Act, some violation of foreign law. It was a foreign
repealed
defunct
foreign law,
right?
or
Repealed
defunct foreign law,
right? And so that's a problem. But you're exactly right. It goes even further than that, right? There's something that these national park superintendents put out called the Superintendent's Compendium, and it comes out like every year, where they set like the rules of the park, and they can like say everything from like, hey, look, a flotation device that you can use when you're going into the water, that excludes air mattress, right? And so that's how it becomes a federal crime to float on an air mattress in a body of water in certain national parks. That's not even a reg. That's a superintendent that's publishing a PDF on the website.
So I do want to say the percentage. So for everybody who's inclined to get really outraged about this, the percentage of federal prisoners who are in prison over these kind of picayune, non-statutory things is really small.
1.5%.
Is it that small?
It's about 1.5% to 2%. Yeah, it fluctuates, but that's for violations of administrative law, essentially.
We're not like the workhorse statutes are like people who are violating actual, text of congressional enactment,
and it's all guns and drugs and immigration crimes. That's the lion's share.
And so I don't want to overstate the importance of this stuff, except in one sense where I think it's really important, where the day the government decides that you are the problem, you have violated a federal statute or a federal administrative guidance that's enforceable criminally. I did it this morning, not even sure what I did that counts, but like every day you go through life unknowingly violating federal rules that are potentially criminally enforceable. And, we don't live in Putin land where the federal government has the mandate to go after you on that basis if you're politically unpopular. But we do have a lot of capacity to do that.
Yeah.
And so when you see these prosecutions of fairly exotic things, you have to ask the question, how did that come to be?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, look, I mean, we've certainly built a robust machinery for which that exact wrong that you've touched on could be implemented, right? In that sort of retaliatory, selective prosecution. But yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And one of the things that particularly gets me concerned is that a lot of these crimes are targeted at businesses and organizations, and they're meant to govern those entities. However, the scope of the liability of the officers in those entities is very nebulous. The board is its own different set of protections, but for particular officers and people serving in the company, it's really, I believe, at the pleasure of the prosecutor over whether or not they're going to get prosecuted for that.
Yeah, no, prosecutorial discretion is a big exercise in trust. It's like the biggest trust fall that's going on in America right now is prosecutorial discretion. I mean, the example that I posted today, just sort of as a joke, was there was this video that was published about this, young girl, she's 13 years old, she's on a roller coaster or something, and she gets hit in the face with a seagull, right?
Yep.
Well, if that seagull died, that's incidental take under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. Like she didn't have to have any intent whatsoever, and that's 16 USC 707. It's over, right?
Let's get I'm with the seagull.
Yeah, me too. Right. The seagull was fine, I think. It flew off. So yeah.
Well, speaking of individual crimes, Richard, would you please ask your question?
I am a crime.
No. Your question.
This is kind of a silly question, but it's also kind of meta. It's sort of really about how you gather your material. We have a lot of expressions, silly expressions like fashion crimes and things like that. I'm wondering if you've actually encountered fashion crimes in federal law, and if there are some of those other kind of expressions, if you found those as well. I can't things like fashion crimes. I can't think of other similar expressions, but I know they're out there.
Oh yeah, no, there are absolutely fashion crimes. Like for example, if you're riding a moped in Fort Gordon, you have to wear quote unquote long trousers in order to ride a moped. So that's one. Also, if you want to buy a wig that is made out of polyester fibers like an actual like fake hair, that's fine. But if you actually want to get polyester hairs implanted into your scalp, that's a federal crime. You can't go around with those. There's federal regulation that is criminally prosecutable, which actually specifies where the tag must be placed between the shoulders in any kind of wool garment. So yeah, there's plenty of fashion crimes for sure. But no, they touch on literally every aspect of human life. When I wrote my book, How to Become a Federal Criminal, I divided it up into chapters like mail, money, food, because what I wanted to do is show there's no aspect of your life that doesn't have a criminal penalty attached to some violation. So yeah, every aspect, fashion, everything. Yeah.
Thank you, Richard.
One person actually mentioned something in the chat that I thought was interesting. Was I was joking about this incidental take with a seagull hitting your face, and somebody said seagulls are migratory. No, that's the beauty of the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, is that the list of quote unquote migratory birds includes tons of birds that are not migratory, like even remotely. So the question is not, is it a migratory bird? Is it a quote unquote migratory bird under federal law?
Oh, it worked.
Hi, Mateo.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh, great, thanks. Did you have a preference for which question?
Where are you that you've got a totem pole in the background, dude?
I mean, you've got to guess. It's like your daily photos.
You're in Vancouver.
Campus of Stanford University, still.
Oh.
That's interesting.
Mateo, I really liked the question you posed in the chat, and also your you can ask another question if you'd like, whatever of the two you thought was better.
Sure, I'll do the first one, but also first I'll do the one in the chat. Mike, so I was wondering if doing this work has like infected the way that you just walk around and like experience the world. Like if you see someone opening the door kind of weird and you're like, oh, US code something. Has that been a weird thing for you? Has that made going around difficult?
Yeah, well, I mean, it is sort of a curse, because I for whatever reason, my brain has latched on to the sort of visual structure of the code. And so it's a little Rain Man-esque in that, like, if I do see something, I kind of spatially know where it lives in the CFR, and I know where it lives in the US code. I know what the potential types of violations are. But if the question is, do I feel like nervous about my own criminal liability, I feel far less nervous about my own criminal liability, because it is what I think is the fundamental point of crime a day, which is when everything's a crime, nothing is a crime, right? When you dilute the criminal code so much, enforcement is virtually impossible, unless the big question that's always been in my mind is, unless somebody in government gets really pissed off that I'm doing this project and says, like, let's look at Mike, because then all of the broad, vague statutes come into play. Like, they look at your bank account. Well, were you depositing money under $10,000 too frequently? Okay, maybe that's structuring. Were you traveling across state lines with an unshucked ear of corn in the backseat of your car? Okay, well,
structuring is a serious crime.
Structuring, I beg to differ. I think structuring is not a serious crime.
Oh, but we gotta save this dispute for Pugilism Week, because I'm a serious advocate of the anti-structuring laws.
Yeah, I think structuring is a total joke. I will love to have that discussion with you someday.
It's a date.
Okay. Sounds good. But yeah, no, my point is, I'm not any less or more afraid. I'm just like a nerd all the time. Like, that's the only, that's the big effect. But yeah, I certainly see crimes everywhere. That's for sure.
Gotcha. And my other question is related to a personal project that I'm actually involved in right now. I have to research the rules regarding jury sequestration, where it came from, and just any sort of literature on how that got there. So my question is, do you know anything about it, or do you just have any advice for like obscure statutory research generally for a novice?
Oh, well, so jury sequestration, I could talk about. That could be a whole nother episode about how there's sequestration and then there's sequestration, right? There's like the judge saying, like, you are hereby sequestered, which is like not even remotely sequestration. And then there's like John Cusack movie Sequestration, like we're putting you in a nondescript motel somewhere, and like that's also very different. But in terms of just general statutory research, I mean, there are great tools out there. Anybody can email me anytime, Mike@crimeaday.com. If you want to like reach out with anything, I can give you some of my tips and tricks about how to find
awesome. Thank you.
dark corners of the code. Yeah, for sure.
Thanks, Mateo. Okay, and then we have Charles.
Hold on, I might be muted.
Hi, Charles. There you go.
Hey, guys. So I guess my question is, and you kind of touched on that with the drone case, but what's the funniest, or I guess most obscure federal crime that someone's ever actually been charged with? Because there's a whole bunch in the code that, yes, it's never actually been used, but, either as a tack-on or as a primary charge, whichever.
So the McNabb case is a good example, I think, but that one is actually one that was a little more serious, right? I mean, you can obviously see the policy justification for it, right? You don't want to exploit fisheries, et cetera. But one of the most absurd examples, I think, is Bobby Unser, race car driver, was out snowmobiling, and there was a blizzard, right? And a blizzard kind of just came upon them, and Bobby Unser and the person he was snowmobiling with got lost. They sort of got off track because it was whiteout conditions completely. And then they were just totally lost to the point where they were actually getting hypothermic. Their snowmobiles broke down. They like holed up in this little shed. And when they finally got rescued, the people that rescued them said, "Hey, look, as a technical matter, you actually snowmobiled across some federal wildlife preserves. And that's a federal crime." And they were like, "Oh, well, good thing we're alive and didn't die," right? And they were like, "Yeah, so that is good, except you are being prosecuted for that."
Oh
and
my
Bobby
God.
Unser was prosecuted and convicted for it.
Was it jail time or just a fine?
I can't remember if I can't remember what the sentence is. I used to know.
And serious question is that is there no scienter requirement in that?
No.
So it's just a strict liability offense?
Yeah, no. So many of the federal misdemeanors, and I think it was a misdemeanor in this case. This is a federal misdemeanor, but a huge number of the federal misdemeanors, which never generally see the inside of a federal district courthouse, are strict liability. There's no scienter requirement whatsoever. That's why I and a lot of other people have advocated for a default mens rea for every federal criminal statute.
I mean, that's really crazy. I don't think you should query whether it should be ever possible accidentally to commit a crime.
Yeah, it should not be. And look, this may not be popular, but one of the people who've written most about this is Justice Gorsuch. He's written about this extensively, and maybe one of the most sort of coherent bodies of discussion on that issue. So,
and kind of just as a quick follow-up to Charles's question, Susan had asked, and she wanted to be asked for her, what, like, if there was a percentage that you're aware of the written law is obsolete or purposely neglected.
Oh, I mean, it's well in excess of 95%, right? I mean, that's I mean, I guess I don't, maybe I don't understand the question, but I mean, in terms of the criminally punishable provisions that are actually utilized or ever prosecuted, it's well below, that.
But the utilization is distinct from it still being valid. So at any time, again, back to prosecutorial discretion, someone could decide, hey, this works.
Yeah. I think I talked last time I was on here about the Greenpeace case, right? I mean, it's this old pirate statute that ended up getting used, after 100 years had passed. There's a lot of examples like that where there is technically a statute that fits and then it gets dusted off and used hundreds of years later. It does happen. Yeah.
Love for some stuff to be sunsetted. But here's Daniel.
Oh, yeah.
Hey, Daniel.
Hello.
Hey.
So my question is, are there any obscure cheese crimes?
No, I'm not aware of any cheese crimes. I don't think. Oh, wait, actually, you know what? I do know every cheese crime that's ever been written. There are countless, right? Like, so this project is literally how I learned that the holes in Swiss cheese are called eyes, and that cheese without eyes is actually called blind cheese, and it's a federal crime to sell blind cheese, except if it's being used for manufacturing purposes. So that's one thing to remember about Swiss cheese. My favorite cheese crime, and Ben knows this. I think everybody knows this. That is it a federal crime to sell grated cream cheese? And
Ben, we're both muted, so I don't.
oh, okay, all right.
This
know
is
what
the
you-
best crime of all
It's
time in all subjects.
It's my favorite crime because, like, it's explicitly carved out in the code that the standard of identity for grated cheese may not include cream cheese. And, like, in my book, I have a couple of ideations about how you might even manufacture grated cream cheese and whether it would look distinct from regular cream cheese or not, or whether you would end up just making a mess of your cheese grater. I don't know, but it does remain the fact that if somebody manages to sell grated cream cheese, then they're going to be in some hot water. So
I wonder how that would affect cheesecake.
well, it'd still be delicious.
Yeah, hopefully. All right, and we have another question, and hopefully this is working. Did it? I don't know if it did. Okay.
We have a question from the Big Blue blogger who's been absent for a long time. Welcome back, Big Blue blogger.
I don't think he saw the prompt yet.
Well, we'll have to go to somebody else.
Okay.
So here's my question in the meantime. You know, you only have a few more 100 years before this project is done.
820, yeah.
Yeah, what comes next?
State crimes. As soon as I tweet the last federal crime, I'm going to state crimes.
But
and then municipal
there are
code.
other federal crimes always being created and new fact patterns being implemented through regulation. How do you mean in the, over the next 820 years to handle the backlog that gets created? Are you going to go back and deal with that?
I've been tacking those on to the end. I'll just take care of those at the end. Although sometimes I bump them up to the front. Have you done a calculation
of how much additional time they will require?
Yeah, so I have, and it does fluctuate greatly. During the Trump administration, there was so little regulatory activity actually, and that federal regulatory crimes were not created. Although he did create a federal crime of possessing or buying or selling a bump stock, right? For example, through regulatory action, right? So there were examples, but there was a very slowed portion of regulatory growth there. But there were statutory.
But were there, in the famed Trump regulatory rollback that he talked about, were crimes eliminated?
No, in fact, no, and in fact, I think some were very minimal. In my research, I found most of the regulatory crimes that were claimed to have been eliminated, I found reorganized and moved elsewhere within the federal code. In other words, there would be like the argument was that we eliminated all these federal crimes. Well, there used to be a subsection that contained 6 crimes and a subsection that contained 2 crimes. Now there was one subsection that contained 15 crimes. A great example was, and I was heartbroken when my book was about to get published. One of my favorite crimes is that it's a federal crime to whistle on a CB radio. Okay, and
so that should be a crime.
It's right, and it's a federal crime to tell jokes on a CB radio. It's a federal crime to make sound effects. Michael Winslow retweeted that. That was my favorite day. Was that Michael Winslow retweeted it? But no, but
who still uses CB radios?
Yeah, I'm not.
I want to say like the 70s are a long time ago.
Yeah, I used one probably last. I used one in the late 90s, but I bought it from Radio Shack. Somebody says, "What is a CB radio?" Citizens Band Radio.
Yeah, Paula is 8 years old.
But it's all right.
She's going to law school this year, but you can't expect her to know what a CB radio is.
They're great. They're like a walkie-talkie on steroids, just like where the 10 codes came from, like breaker 19, right? That's CB radio.
10-4.
10-4, good buddy.
Good
right,
buddy,
exactly. Yeah. I got a Kojak with a Kodak, right? That means I've got a cop with a speed gun. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But the great thing about this was that they claimed it was eliminated, but then I just found it moved over to another section with all these CB radio crimes. And so I have found that many of them did not vanish. They just moved around a lot. So I don't think there's been meaningful rollback.
I wonder if they will try to put those on another area. That would be really interesting. So I'm going to ask the Big Blue Bloggers question because we're having a little technical difficulty. Sure. Wouldn't be a show without it. So he says, do you have any opinion on Tom Barrack and whether he's just a poor, innocent billionaire persecuted for having friends even richer than he is?
I don't. And I find, remind me, what is he actually charged at this point, or is he just?
Yeah, the indictment came down this week. It's nearly 50 pages.
Yeah.
And it includes, I think, pretty astonishing allegations of him taking direction from the UAE about what material to get into presidential candidate speeches, doing it. This is extraordinary behavior. And it does, it's a good rule of thumb that if your indictment is more than 40 pages, it's what that's actually an interesting, what's the number of pages that if your indictment exceeds, as a defense lawyer, you're like, oh my God, my client is fucked?
Well, it depends. I mean, sometimes a wicked long indictment shows that you've got like a really bad prosecutor. Actually, like they're like, and like sometimes that can even be better. But I would say any indictment over half a page is really, really bad for the client. Like extremely bad. Like.
Unless because it's a very well written half page.
I mean, as everybody knows, and as everybody knows, there's this thing, and we've been talking about it a lot lately. This acquitted conduct sentencing issue. It's a really big issue, and I've written cert petitions to the Supreme Court on this issue. Is that like if you get caught on one offense, remember one offense in a 10-count indictment, 100-count indictment, whatever. One offense, the judge can still, even if the jury acquits you on every other charge, the judge can take those into consideration as relevant conduct at sentencing if the judge finds by a preponderance of the evidence that you did those things.
Yeah, but I wanna dwell on indictment length for a minute. Because in my experience as a journalist covering cases, there's like the 12-page indictment. And the 12 pages indictment means they've scraped by and they've got you on something, and it's, they've got one or two counts, and one of them's a false statements count, by the way, because there's always a false.
And one's a forfeiture allegation, which
there's some bad stuff. You did some bad stuff. You're going to plead out, but as a journalist, when you see a 12, 15-page indictment, you're like, okay, they've got some shit. And then there's like when you see a 50-page indictment, with 10 counts. I'm just making up numbers here. You're like, they're making a statement here. And I agree with you that sometimes the super long indictment says we're throwing a lot of spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks. But there's also the 50-page page-turning indictment that you're like, oh my God, he did this and he did this. And those are like, when a serious prosecutor's office comes out with a lot of pages, there's actually value in just the volume.
Yeah, I would say that's true. Obviously there are surplusage issues that, like, if you're really vigorously, defending, you're going to want to attack. But I will say that if you've got a 50-page count indictment, a 50-count indictment, or a 50-page indictment, rather, either one, if you're quoting documents, right, actual emails or whatever, and there's explicit language in there, and you look at it and you say, every element of the offense is met in this email. If this email was in fact written, the crime has been committed, that's devastating. There's another flavor of indictment, though, that is long for long's sake, where you have 50, instances. It's 50 counts, but every single one of them is a phone call, right? Every count is a phone call. If the government still can't prove materiality, right, that these misrepresentations or omissions were material, right, the whole thing can vanish, right, on a motion to dismiss, or that can happen. That's not the most common situation, but I will just say that, sometimes it's crammed full of a lot of stuff. I say always look for, if the bulk of the indictment is made up by just the statutory language, it is probably not as strong as if there is a very strong explicit set of documents in quotation marks and those things inside those quotation marks meet every element of the offense, that's a much stronger indictment. Yeah.
Well, we're going to leave it there on that cheerful note. Mike Chase, thank you so much for coming on today.
Anytime.
You're a great American, a terrible criminal, because you're showing all your tricks
All my
to the world
cards.
every day. Bring on year 8.
Very excited.
I will. Yeah.
I can't
I'll
wait
see
to
ya.
find out what crimes that I've committed unknowingly. We will be back 23 hours from now, exactly on the dot. Tomorrow is cheese night, so hopefully we will not commit any cheese crimes. I will not grate any cream cheese and try to
I'm
sell
bringing
it.
grated cream
You
cheese.
should try. You got to try it.
I am
Yeah.
totally bringing grated cream cheese to cheese night tomorrow.
Okay. Everyone have a wonderful Thursday. Thank you again, Mike.